Alrighty then, here we go again. It's another day trying to get to work. I continually wake up, as I should put it, closer to on time, because I'm not supposed to be at work until 8, but I got in the habit of getting there at like 7. And so whenever I wake up and I'm not leaving the house until 7, I feel behind or late, but that's not the case. I have plenty of time to do the things that need to be done. I just am not used to making this kind of time yet. But at any rate, talking a little bit about receiving criticisms and stuff as a creative, as a writer, and any of that. And if you're in a creative line of work, you kind of know that that is to be expected. And if you're not in a creative line of work, then maybe perhaps that is a surprise to you. And some people who are in a creative line of work, it's a surprise to them as well. And I obviously have been creating things for a while, and I'm used to the criticisms that come with that. We've always lived in a world where kind of everybody's a critic because everybody feels like they can mimic the creativity that you put out into this world. I think it's especially problematic now with social media because it does expose people to just how many people there are out there who can do these things or can create these things. And so when people do criticisms now, they're more liable to make it almost personal, not personal, but almost personal. It's always a weird thing knowing how to take criticism because, obviously it's hard to hear people say ill things about your work and not take it any sort of way. But to the same end, like I said, it comes with the territory. Like, I've told a lot of people who are looking to get into writing or whatever that it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to get used to people saying things about your work that doesn't make you feel good, because that's part of the game. That's part of being a creator. And if you can't handle that, then you should seriously reconsider what you're trying to pursue in this life. But so getting back on topic, I followed this Discord channel. It was a random Discord channel formed out of a Reddit post, and we're sharing work on a bi-daily schedule. So every 48 hours somebody shares a piece of their work. And I shared the first chapter of my published work, my to-be-published work, to try and get people's opinions on the matter. And they more or less threw it through a blender, and that's okay. We need criticisms and we need honest feedback, but I feel like the idea was that one person went through and gave their criticisms, and then everyone else went through and just kind of copied what that one person said, and people were beyond alarmed by the abrupt cliffhanger ending that the first chapter ended on. And I'm like, the goal of the first chapter is to draw your readers in. It's not to resolve whatever questions arose at the beginning of the chapter. I don't know very many books that resolve a whole lot of stuff within the first chapter, unless it's maybe a sequel or something. And so tons of people were put off by that. A lot of them were put off so my story is told through a dual timeline. So it's you follow the characters in the present, you follow the characters in the past. And a lot of people thought that the flashback sequence, so to speak, was in fact a flashback sequence, when it was not a flashback sequence. It was them going back in time to establish this second timeline. and people were thrown off because they were anxious to figure out what was happening in the present tense, and then I took them to the past and they weren't anxious to go to the past, which is an understandable rub, because like if you bought the book, obviously like the back blurb would have described that there is 2 timelines going on here, and so you would kind of already know what you're getting into. But since none of these people had purchased the book, none of them knew that they were walking into a story told through dual timelines, and that is an understandable issue there. But it's like, I feel like you have a different lens on what you're consuming when you consume it with the thought process of criticizing it versus when you consume it with the thought process of consuming it, if you will. And all of these people obviously were consuming with the ideology of criticizing it, as opposed to just consuming it to consume it. And like I said, once again, there's different reasons why you would read something. This is a service that we're providing to each other as writers to try and better each other's work. And this was the whole reason why I really hesitated to even submit something from this book, because the book's already done in my mind, and I didn't want to go back to the drawing board with it. And that's what like a lot of these suggestions, and like I said, once again, they're making these suggestions only based off of the first chapter. They have no idea the bigger, better, badder story that's being told here. And so from their perspective, they're just like, oh, well, you need to resolve more plot lines at the end of the first chapter. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, who resolves plot lines at the end of the first chapter? Like, the first chapter should be the chapter that gives you the most questions and raises the most concerns, because it's trying to entice you to continue reading. So that seemed odd to me, and I think really what they wanted was some return to the first timeline, the present tense timeline, before I wrapped up chapter 1. But like, honestly, I don't know. It's like I said, this is the whole reason why I didn't want to do this, because the book's already done. Am I going to let 7 random people on Discord make me rethink how I've written the book? And it's hard to not hear that many opinions, especially on a work where you've only heard like 4 or 5 other opinions, 3 of which being like professional editors, so I trust their opinions. But yeah, so it's like, am I gonna do that? Probably not. And then like now I'm looking back at the idea of like, is this just a giant colossal waste of my time? And again, I don't know that that's yes or no or anything of that nature perhaps, but it's just interesting to me that the perspective that people have. And like, I feel like I was relatively kind to the other people when I was editing their work. I was not like, oh my gosh, this is garbage. And there was one piece that I thought was steaming garbage, but I still found a way to be nice and civil about it. And like I said, it's different because they're more receptive to change, because they're not ready to publish this thing. And I feel like people take that to heart as well. Like when I tell people, oh yeah, this is a book that I'm going to publish tomorrow, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to pick it apart and show you how broken it is. And it's just like, is that really the goal in one's life? And the interesting thing is, like, I can remember myself being that person once upon a time, like in my young adulthood, in my early college years. And like, it's a show, it's a sign of one's immaturity. Like, I have never made a video game before. Still to this day, have I never made a video game before. And I can remember being so like critical of the video games that I was playing and being like, these guys are a bunch of lazy bums, they're not working hard enough to make these games good enough, and all these silly, ridiculous things. And I was nitpicking the life out of it. And it just is no sort of way to be. And it's very much so the same thing with this situation here. A bunch of readers who maybe have dabbled in writing a couple of times, and they're just like, oh my gosh, like, why do you go to the past? Why don't you stay in the present? And it's like, you've got to experiment with different storytelling, like, techniques. Like, I feel like having dueling timelines isn't that uncommon. Like, I don't feel like I reinvented storytelling by telling the story through two different timelines. In fact, I feel like I was playing or watching a game. I was either watching a TV show or playing a game that did that very well when I was writing If Ghosts Could Cry. And that's what enticed me to make it more of a dual timelines, because the original draft was pretty much all in the past, and the idea of this second present tense timeline having any sort of relevance was not there at all. And like, one of them made a comment about the fact that it's essentially just the main character having a conversation with someone, and like, I get that that's kind of hard to discern, like, that this person's having this conversation, but the conversation's being displayed in this book is a really long narrative. But like, to the same end, I do go back to the present tense and have those two converse with each other to try and ease the gap that it's like, no, they're not getting this story in as much detail as the reader is. Jesse, the main character, is summarizing the story to the person he's telling it to, but the reader is getting the full kit and caboodle. And there is a certain level of a suspension of one's disbelief that needs to happen in order to be able to enjoy really any story. And this one is no different. And that's the thing, is you haven't built that trust or that credibility with these people yet. I've built it with very few people, really. And so they're just anxious to be like, oh, this guy's got published work, I'm going to tear it up. And it's nice to think that that might not be the goal here, but it definitely felt that way. And like, they were doing weird things like indenting stuff and like starting new paragraphs, and I was like, guys, like, I got this formatted by like 3 different editors. I don't think it needs to be reformatted. And like, formatting it's interesting how many things are subjective in the writing world, like formatting, grammar, all these things that you feel like should be like pretty standard things are really not standard at all. Creativity is creativity, and your own creativity serves to be able to better any project that you put out. And like, the formatting of your book is largely up to you as the writer, in that it creates or it controls a lot of your pacing. And so if you want to pace your book a certain way, or if you want to pace a scene a certain way, you format it a certain way to fit that pacing. And so there was some good comments and criticisms that came out of it, like back-to-back repeated words, things like that, things that I am surprised that it went through several lines of editing without having been caught. So like, those sorts of things, I was very fortunate and happy for that people were pointing that out. But to the same end, like, all these larger questions of like, oh, well, it was cool until the flashback, or the flashback ended too abruptly, and it's like, I don't know, it's like, that's kind of how I would expect something to end, so that you would be more enticed to turn the page again. But I don't know. If I'm being honest, I have not been a reader in a very long time. And so, like, once I started seriously picking up writing, I have not been reading that much. And so maybe I am out of touch. Like, I seriously picked up writing in 2015. And that was more or less when I stopped reading things. And so, like, perhaps I have lost touch with the market some. And there's, like, different standards as to how you end a chapter. because like essentially what I feel like they're getting at is like each chapter should feel like almost like an episode of a TV show, in that it resolves whatever thing was presented in that episode, but should also move the plot towards resolving the bigger thing that the whole TV show is about. And I don't know that every TV show even needs to be written in that way, but I definitely don't think that we need to be writing our books that way too. I don't know, it just struck me as very odd that everyone had so much beef with the way this first chapter ended. And it's like, it's interesting in that it's like, is it really that much of a colossal thing? Is it kind of a group thing? And that's like my issue with public comments, is like we shared it through a Google Doc, and people just posted their public comments on there, and then like next thing you know, like 6 of the 7 people are all saying the same thing. And it's like, okay, so did we just see the first guy who was like, oh, I didn't really like this ending, I thought it was abrupt, and everybody else just piled on, they're like, oh yeah, way abrupt, oh yeah, you can't end a chapter like that. And it's just like, I think I can actually, and I think that I will. So take some of it into consideration, take some of it not in consideration, and then of course like there's just the general idea of like how one establishes these things, the general idea of where am I going with this? How do I want to say it? Like the general idea of how one takes criticism. Like there's obviously bad ways to take criticism. I've dealt with people like that as well who could not take it. The president of the guild that I was in did not take criticism well at all. She got very defensive and would like defend her work with explanations of things that only like she would know. Like, and it's hard not to have that perception of things. As the author, things make perfect sense to you because you know all the information, but your audience does not. Your audience is coming at this blind, and some things will be confusing to them that seem like common sense to you. And if you cannot disconnect from your own work and see that, then you're not going to be creating very consumer-friendly products. And so she was not able to take criticisms of her work, and she handled it very poorly. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, where you take everything that people say about your work and you change everything about your work every time someone says they don't like something, to the point where you don't even recognize your own work anymore. And that's not good either. You have to find a happy balance, and as the creator of this story, you have to know what is good for the story and what is not. And that's what it comes down to. I just feel like it was impactful because it's kind of the first time I've had fresh eyes on this book, and for the results to be overwhelmingly negative felt kind of lame. Like, geez, like I've been putting books out for this long, and this is honestly one of my better pieces of writing, and they're over here tearing it up like it's a salad that needs to be shredded or something. I don't know, that was a terrible metaphor. I'm not in the mood right now, but at any rate, just learning how to take criticisms and knowing when it was given in good faith, when it wasn't, when to act and when to not. And that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope it was a pleasant experience. I need to remember to charge my camera because it's not been charged. Goodbye.